much. Of course, first of all, welcome to all attendees, local in London and of course, all over the world. My name is Katharina Jung, and I will lead you through this community sharing. And of course, thanks to my technical help in Beveridge Hall, Christine and Paul, I guess. The FOLIO documentation group invited today to give you some tips and tricks how the official user interface documentation can be used in your institutions too. Next slide, please. We have a little agenda for today. I would like to start with my part. It is a short overview about the documentation working group itself. Sorry, Christine, next slide, please. Okay, as I said, a short overview concerning our working group. Then we have two speakers today, Christine and Emily. And after the presentations, we have the question and answer part when both presentations are ready. The speakers will be glad to answer your questions, as I said, after both presentations. And for the virtual audience, it would be very nice if you use the whole microphones for better understanding. And for my understanding, of course, too. Next slide, please. As I said, I come to my first agenda point. It is the overview concerning the working group documentation. Since this year, the group consists of more than 20 writers from the whole FOLIO community. So we have subject must think about the word, sorry. Subject matter experts from all different SIGs, and they share their knowledge by updating the end-user documentation, for example, in release times, or when there's mistake we found in the documentation and so on. With the Poppy release, the documentation grew up to 200,000 words. It is composed actually of 16 sections, 95 chapters, and a 95 entry glossary. And of course, everything will rise like FOLIO does. For Casnalia, I was not able to count the words actually, but my colleague helped me by made a small program for me, so I hope I can name the actual numbers in the future. Next slide, please. This slide is about how each of you can participate in the documentation working group, or better to say, for the documentation itself. Every member of the FOLIO community, of course, can contribute to this co-production, because every feedback is very desired. Either you can send us your wishes about changes in the documentation, or you just give us hints concerning grammar and spelling, or when we have new apps, you can tell us there is new documentation needed too. We have it actually for the Serials app. A colleague from Germany will write the official documentation, I hope, for the Ramsons update, or I think she writes it at the moment while we're here in London, or you are in London, and we can publish it soon. Another possibilities of participation are, of course, proofreading. When you say you don't want to write yourself, but you are good in grammar or spelling, as I mentioned already, it's possible to say, hey, I have a little time, and perhaps users is my working area, and I can help you perhaps by proofreading. And of course, another possibility, or the most important, is to write yourself for the documentation, or be a co-writer. So of course, you can always contact us if you are interested in, and luckily we have it that year that several people came towards me and say, hey, how can I help? And I think we found work for each of them. Next slide, please. Now I would like to come to our second agenda part, the presentations. We start with Christine, followed by Emily. Christine, your turn, please.
Thank you, Katarina, for that introduction. Let me go back a slide. Oh, it's going for the whole thing. Okay, there we go. Tech problem solved. Okay, hello, I am Christine Tobias. I am the coordinator for public services at the Michigan State University Libraries. I am also the documentarian for the users app, the bulk edit users, or the users part of the bulk edit app, the list app, and the corresponding settings app for those sections. So what I'm going to talk about briefly today is how I used our FOLIO documentation, the official FOLIO docs, to train public services staff on using the list app for our local workflows. And screen sharing on Zoom is not my forte. Disclaimer.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Do not touch it. Okay, got it. All right. So anyway, back to a little bit of information about the MSU libraries. Our university and our library supports the research and academic needs of about 51,000 students, including undergraduate and graduate students. And we have about almost 6,000 faculty and staff across campus. And then as a land grant institution, we also serve the general public or our community members. So public services in the MSU libraries is a division that includes all of our branch libraries and all of our library units that staff a front-facing service point. So library operations, basically, on the front end. This includes 11 branch libraries or units. So in the main library, we have circulation, maps, special collections, makerspace, Make Central, digital scholarship, art library, digital media, and music library. And then away from the main library building, we have the business library and university archives. So we implemented FOLIO in July of 2021 with the, I say Juniper release here, but my colleague told me that she's pretty sure we started with the Iris release. So anyhow, we started way back in 2021. We're currently in the Poppy release in our production, and in test we are at Quizmalia SP3. So just a general overview of FOLIO docs and comparing it to creating training and resources at your local library. So the FOLIO docs at docs.folio.org That is the official documentation for the entire FOLIO community. It's a general overview of the FOLIO UI, basically a handbook. It is not instructions for how to use FOLIO at your institution. Also, the FOLIO docs are text only via a web page. We do not have screenshots, screencasts, or videos included in the FOLIO docs at this time. So the need at the MSU libraries, and you probably have this need at your libraries as well, is, that documentation, that's wonderful. But how do we use our FOLIO tenant at our library to do the work that I have to do? So developing documentation and training resources for your staff, you can include detailed instructions. You can make it very granular, very specific. And you can use examples for how to use those FOLIO apps and cross-app interactions for your library's workflows. And you can enhance the instructional value of your training resources by using screenshots, screencasts, and videos of these examples. Okay, so in my example, I conducted a LIST app training for our public services staff. We started the LIST beta app in our Poppy test environment, I believe. So, I had been hearing from library staff, and our staff includes some of the library liaison selectors, bibliographers. And I said, we're going to do this training at our public services meeting. I would like for you to give me some examples of what you'd like to do in the LIST app, and we'll demonstrate those at the training session. So they did provide me some examples, but I saw that there were some unmet needs in the LIST app. For example, one of our staff, or a couple actually, wanted to have more bibliographic data available via the LIST app. So we found that you could not get publication date, for example, via the LIST app. So it was a little bit of a hurdle. So I did some digging, and I realized that there's a cross-app interaction, or a hack, or a workaround that we can use to do this. So, so the training was, it was actually an in-person or hybrid workshop at a public services meeting. I demoed the LIST app, answered all their questions. I also demoed this workaround of using lists to get information to put into bulk edit and build a query and download your matched records. And you can even view the bulk edit logs. And the bulk edit app in the with the download matched records actually has that bibliographic data that our selectors were needing. So I demonstrated that. And then to supplement the training session, I created a guide that gave the steps. I used the FOLIO docs as an outline, and I put the actual steps into this guide and how to use the LIST app and the bulk edit workaround at our institution. And in this guide, I also included the screenshots, the screencasts, and I also recorded the training session and added a link to that for our staff. Okay. So I'm going to share some best practices that I learned through this experience. So it's great to use the FOLIO docs that general handbook information as a guide to develop training opportunities or additional training resources for your staff. When you do folio or when you do training, make sure that you set and share the expectations about what your staff will be able to do in this list, in the app that you're training for. So be sure to let them know, you know, this is how it functions. These are the permissions you'll need. This is the workflow. Here's a workaround. If you set those expectations up front, then you have fewer, I guess, complaints later on. Well, you didn't tell me it doesn't do that. So set those expectations up front. Include screenshots, screencasts, videos, tutorials to enhance the instructional value of your training resources using your local workflow examples. And then most importantly, save your local documentation in a secured, shared staff space, like an intranet or a private website. And let staff know that this is there for them and let them know how they can access it. And now we're on to Emily.
Hello, I'm Emily Semenoff. I'm the Catalog Management Librarian at CU Boulder. And I've been part of the documentation working group for about 6 months now. I'm in charge of the inventory app documentation. So shortly after I joined the working group, we started discussing this presentation. And originally we were going to discuss different training practices using documentation at our organizations. The problem was I don't do training as part of my job in Folio. And so I was like, I have nothing to contribute to this conversation. But Katerina suggested I think about it and reach out to colleagues and see if I could discuss how other people do training in Folio. And what I discovered was, out of everybody who responded to my query, and mostly I asked people who were like heads of sections and asked, how does your section use this? And of everybody I contacted, only one person mentioned training. So that made me reevaluate what I was going to discuss. So from all the responses I got, they could be grouped as followed: local documentation, reference, troubleshooting, and then someone mentioned the glossary, which I thought was a very good thing to bring out. First, with local documentation. A few mentioned using Folio docs for a basis for our local documentation. Some of it was basically just as a basis, and others were as linking as required reading. So for example, from my own experience, we came over from Sierra to Folio a little over a year ago. And if any of you have previous experience with Sierra, we had to create lists, which is how I did most of my work. Translating those create lists into Folio was an interesting experience. But thanks to the docs, I was able to figure out some of the simpler lists to just do in inventory. So you can, for example, the top example is how to find instance status in the documentation. And that led to my own documentation on what I needed to select. Second, and this was the most mentioned use of Folio docs at our institution, was using it to just basically understand current functionality, which is also a very helpful way to find things, because searching the wiki can be complicated a lot of the times. Is basically how I use documentation most of the time, because for instance, like apps like bulk edit, I do not need to use that most of the time, but every few months I'll have someone ask me, what can I use to edit with using bulk edit? And so I have to go and look, what parts of inventory can I use to update using bulk edit? And more often than not, it's like that functionality has not arrived yet, but it is coming. The other way we can use Folio docs and do at our institution is to troubleshoot workflows. So you can look and see, okay, this is my workflow. Why aren't the steps working? And you can check the steps against the Folio docs to see perhaps you're using that function incorrectly, or perhaps we have a bigger issue to talk to the FOLIO community about. Third, and only one colleague mentioned this, but it's one that I thought was very important, is the glossary. They mentioned that when we went through migration, they shared it widely. And the reason is because FOLIO definitions may not match your expectations. So for instance, I found this in the glossary as the library. How FOLIO defines library might not match how you would define a library. And just these minor definitions differences can really make a difference on how you use FOLIO. So this came up with a few best practices. First and foremost, and I think Christine mentioned this as well, is FOLIO Docs is not meant to replace local documentation. It's meant as a guide or a supplemental material, but it is not going to tell you how to do your own workflows. Second, it is a convenient place to learn about current functionality. It'll tell you what you can do right now, and there's also a place for you to see what past iterations allowed you to do. So if you're not up on your on the most current release, you can still see what previous instances will do. Finally, it can assist in troubleshooting local workflows by showing how different functions are performed, and give you a better sense of what is possible at the moment and what isn't, which is really big in FOLIO at the moment. And that is it for me. Any questions? Laura. Do we have a mic?
I have two completely unrelated questions, so I'll just hang on to the mic for a moment. My first question is about the official docs, and I'm wondering what the status of translating those into languages other than English is. Has there been any movement on that?
Katerina, do you know that?
Yes, I do. Thank you for your question. And of course, my two speakers, thanks for your presentations first. We made the first steps in the German translation concerning the documentation, and we have already a demo site online. Perhaps I can share the link with you when we upload the slides in SCAD. Or perhaps also in the WOLFcon Slack channel when you're interested in, or perhaps you can just contact us in Slack for the link where we have the demo site online. It's as I said in German, and of course for the future we have to think about our concept to translate the whole documentation. I chose the users area for my test, and at the moment we talk to Ian Waltz and Julian Ladisch how we can bring it online and how we can find more people helping by translation. My answer is okay for you, or do you need more information now?
No, thank you. I just wanted to make sure everyone's aware that not all FOLIO users want to read documentation in English. I think it's really important that we as a community try to support being a truly international community. And my other question actually was for you, Christine. You said that you put your local documentation in a secure place. At Cornell, we have made a point to make all of ours publicly available, and I'm just curious why you chose to have it secure.
I chose to mention. Oh, I put it in a secure place. We have a library intranet that is basically our portal for all of our internal documentation. I would be happy to make that a public guide if people would think that is useful. Yeah, and I can I can do that. I don't think that there's anything Right, right. I don't think they have a policy, and my colleague in the back is shaking her head. So I would be happy to make that a public guide, and I will put the link in Slack. Maybe which channel, documentation work group, and then you can share it with your other Slack channels. I'm not on every Slack channel, but I'm on most of them, but still. So I will do that, Laura. That was a great suggestion. I think I was just thinking like, this is our, you get into that mindset of this is our workflow. This is how we do things at our library. So I better put this on our intranet. I wasn't thinking outside the box on that one.
Have a look at the chat now. We have another question. I think it's not especially to us, but the question is if Cornell also can share the URL to their documentation too.
They're asking for your Cornell documentation too, a link for it.
Test.
Oh, there it is.
In the Folio Wiki, there's a lovely space that our former Folio colleague Erin Netafee created where anyone can share their local documentation so that so there are a number of links there to our unfortunately very out of date documentation at Cornell, but also other places. And I think, if I'm trying to figure out how I want to do something, it helps me to see how somebody else did it. Even if I, in the end, don't do it that way, it's really helpful for thinking about what are possibilities for doing this. But also, if somebody else has explained something already, I'm a cataloger. I steal. If somebody else did it already, I'm just going to, yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to add to that at Stanford, we actually created a training website that is open, like anybody can log into it. It's like, I don't remember what the link is, but I can share it on Slack. And we recorded most of our training sessions before we migrated. And so, I mean, it was on to Nirvana, but a lot of it is still relevant, and we're trying to update as we upgrade. And yeah, and if there was anything that we felt that was proprietary or so for some reason we couldn't share, we just put that one on our internal. But so like a lot of our documentation and a lot of our training sessions, we have a Stanford Folio training website, so we're happy to share that.
Good, thank you. That's all good to know.
Hi, I work with data import a lot, so I don't know if you work with data import, you probably know where this is going. The Folio Docs, which is the official documentation, is good for glossary and kind of permissions, but that's not where I would send someone to understand current functionality for data import. It's actually on the wiki. And I'm wondering if there's like, and it's the Wild West. I mean, there's no, we can do whatever you want. And I recently updated many of those pages because there's no mechanism like with the documentation group on, how do we handle these pages that are just kind of out there. And I think my question for your group, the documentation group, is, how do we reconcile that? How do we make sure that this documentation, that it's not institution specific, it's how does it function? How do you run a job? How do you understand the logs, which isn't on the official documentation, but is sort of official in a way?
Christine, you want me to answer?
Yes.
Is it okay for you?
Yeah, that's okay. I was just making notes. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. As you said, it's a kind of wild, wild west. Yes, and it's in our don't know how to say. It's on our task that we do have a look at the website and also what you mean on our tips and tricks area. When we had this survey, things that could be better about Folio, we also get hints about what the community wants. And there is need for troubleshooting or how it works, how the data flows, and so on. And we have to think about what's the original job from the documentation working group. And at the moment, as my speakers also said, we are responsible for the functionality of the apps. So when you say you want more documentation or more things explained or whatever, so perhaps we are looking for another group or 2 new members who are responsible for those soft soft tasks. I don't know better to say in English, but I made a note for me that we will think about. And when I listen to Cornell, Stanford, and of course Christine's training material, perhaps we can make a several area on our tips and tricks side just to make a old school typical link list to share the different training websites or the different training materials from the institutions. I think it could be a nice idea to have one central point, and of course we can make the knowledge concerning that area. So it's our task to, what I want to say, it's our task and perhaps bring it to the different SIGs that we have a new area on our side where you can find different training materials or how the different folio members does training and documentation. And as you said, troubleshooting or deeper documentation than it's actual on our side.
Thank you, Katarina.
You're welcome.
Question back
We
there.
have another question. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Jeremy Nelson at Stanford, and I gave a pre-conference workshop on AI and Folio. And one of the use cases we were looking at was using AI for documentation. And has there been discussion in the documentation SIGs about using like ChatGPT to help? You could use it in a couple of different ways. You could use it to help generate documentation, but another, I think, more interesting application, and I did a little bit of a demo downloading some of the PDFs or saving the PDFs from the official site, is to provide what's called RAG, or retrieval augmented generation. You basically send the context to your model, your ChatGPT model or whatever, and it uses that context to sort of ground the truth of the output of the model. And it allows you to do like a narrative question to your if you did your entire corpus of your documentation, and you could include the wiki, you wouldn't have to have that differentiation between the two. So has there been any discussion or anything about that?
Katarina, do you want to answer that? Did you hear the question?
But maybe also I can answer it.
Thank you, Paul.
Okay.
Wait, Paul's going to answer.
Yeah, my name is Paul from the BSZ, where Katarina is working. And for purposes of translation, we choose ChatGPT for the translation stuff, because we then have the terminology and the glossa, so we know each word is also the same when ChatGPT is using it. And now we make a concept about, okay, how we could implement that into the documentation. But I was in your workshop and I've seen it and was thinking about how could we implement something like a question and answer chat with AI. And I look forward to have this discussion in the future with you, maybe. But yeah, we tried out to do it with the existing tool we have. It's localized for translating the front end, but that doesn't work out because it was so much little work to do, and that's why we used ChatGPT and also used the PDF file and translated it. And now we want to make a sustainable workflow for each language, so we don't have like to do it ourselves every time. I hope that is the answer.
Paul, when it's okay for you, I would like to add something. I think the question also was if we thought about ChatGPT or whatever in the documentation works itself. At the moment, a clear no. But if you have any ideas for us, what can be the use for us, or how we can change our workflows, we would be really glad if you perhaps join one of our next meetings, or when you contact me or another part of the group on Slack. So perhaps we can come to a good starting point. And I think we are often towards new possibilities. And yeah, as I said, we would be glad to hear from you. Thanks. Do we have more questions? Paul, can you have an eye on the room before you?
Yes, at the moment I don't see any hands raised.
Okay, in the chat I don't see anything either. So perhaps we can wait another minute if perhaps someone is typing at the moment.
Yes, I have raised my hands actually a while ago. So I had to allow it, then I raised it again. So probably you see it now?
Yeah, it does. Sorry.
Okay, sorry. First of all, thank you so much, really, documentation team, for the great work you've been doing actually for Folio. We went through an experience actually with the lady who asked about translation of the documentation to German or other languages. We had done actually the Arabic translation for the documentation of Folio since about 2 years ago, actually, and we presented that actually a couple of times. Last year, WOLFcon, we presented also documentation in Arabic. There is an issue. Okay, I have a comment and I have a question, if you allow me. There is an issue with Folio from the start in the design process. Folio is not made to be a multilingual in the level of user-defined policies, or some people call it control vocabularies, including documentation. Folio is a single language when to come to those control vocabularies. Like, for instance, if you want to have your library branch name, you either have it in French or English. You cannot have both in the same field. So that's the way Folio is made. So everybody has to speak English. Otherwise, if you want to go to another language, like what the Spanish people did, basically remove the English and put the Spanish, and the same thing. And for that, actually, we had devised a solution as an engine to allow Folio to accommodate as many languages as there is needed for at the level of the control vocabularies. Like you can have your branch libraries in Arabic when you are in the right to left orientation, and you can have it in English when you are in the left right in English, or French or Chinese, whatever. Same thing goes with the group names for the user app, and so on and so on. Now, the documentation, again, it's really suffer from the same concept. Folio is not made to be multilingual into even for documentation. And this is something we have experienced, or we know for sure that we sometimes, a staff member or a cataloger would like to see the documentation in English, or sometimes they like to see it in Arabic at the same spot. So sometimes he doesn't understand it in one language or the other. He will switch to the other language, will be able to see the documentation in the same time for other languages if his English doesn't help, or the Arabic is not clear enough, the translation, it was not done properly. So he sometimes has to go to the English translation on the same spot to see the translation. This is something doable, except that Folio documentation, so far as I know, is not contextual. What does this mean, contextual? Contextual, that's if I am in circulation and I just want to extend the period for a user, for instance, And at this spot, if I ask for help, I should be able to see the manual that talks about circulation and extending the period. So I should be able to go directly in context, exactly the spot in the manual that talks about this point in particular. If that was done, which requires some enhancement or empowerment at the source code level, because you have to know which module you are in, which section of the module you are in. So when you ask for help, you should be able to fetch in the documentation that from the manual that talks about this particular subject that you need help on. For example, the Kauha project, which is an open source, they had done a superb job, and probably the community, FOLIO community, can learn from the Kauha implementation of the contextual documentations. And I'm hoping that really someday somebody will have to take that move. Unfortunately, it requires some access to the source code of FOLIO to be able to insert these tags or string that bring you the particular topic that you need help on. So that's it. I mean, I hope that's something that in the future contextual documentation should be considered. And I'm not sure about the multilingual documentation because there's something that had to be done out external of the FOLIO, because FOLIO is not prepared to be a multilingual on the control vocabularies yet, as far as I know. Thank you for giving me this chance.
Thank you,
Thanks.
Masood, for raising this issue. Some applause in the public. Yeah, I really don't know what to answer here, but I was not aware that that is a huge problem in the groundwork and in the basic, how Folio is set up. And thank you that you have a tool for it to solve this issue. But yeah, we should talk about it also in this working group documentation to help out here and make Folio more accessible for more languages in a good way and easy way and efficient way. But has the team something else to raise here? Okay. Yeah. But I look forward to have this talk in the future with you.
Thank you.
One question?
To be honest, for me, this just sounds like a solution for well-named tags, like just use the module names inside the application. We could just add like an F1 function to every module, like the using the window or whatever is in the foreground, use the module as the module name and maybe some subpath, use this as text and do like a link over and do a search by tagging all of the content in the documentation by which module is used there and maybe which subscreen.
Sounds like a very lovely, a good idea. I hope you can join the working group documentation for it. That's how community works here. But
yeah,
it's
yeah, it
very
is. It is the same. It's the same concept actually. If you look, as I mentioned, Koha project actually had done a superb job really by Water Solutions on this topic especially, and this is one of the things that really made Koha easier to use and to cope with. But as a gentleman mentioned, it's a simple thing, but this requires some access to the source code. And if you want to do it on a community levels, the product council and whoever the decision maker there has to, approve such a move, which is something is not easy to obtain. But if you want to do it in your own, yes, I agree. You can do anything. Thanks God, Poly is an open source, which is one of the greatest decision has ever been made. Thanks to EBSCO and DexData for taking that direction. But definitely, it's something we need to discuss in documentation, and hopefully the documentation team can have some influence or empowerment really to have the multilingual documentation in context to be part of the future language agnostic, as we claim to be Folio. Folio is supposed to be a language agnostic platform. And hopefully that is a true thing, not just a marketing, pitch or something like that. Thanks.
Thank you. We would make it happen. Any more questions right now? Okay. We are good in time. Thank you so much for contribution, for making this talk. Thank you. Thank you, Katharina. And yeah, have a lovely conference today and a good break and have fun. And thank you so much.
Thank you too. Goodbye.